everyone. Thank you for those joining us in person and for all our friends on Zoom. Are we good back there, Jeff? Okay, Michelle, we good?
Yes.
Would like to call Mark? Are you muted?
All right, I would like to call this special meeting of the Board of Education to order. So good evening. Jill will take notes as secretary, as Sarah is not here this evening and Tara Worm's not able to make it also. So real quick, thank you all for coming. As a district and a community, we have work to do around diversity, inclusion, homophobia, anti-Semitism, religious intolerance, bullying, and all those words that come to mind when we talk about this. The work has started, and tonight we will learn more about the good work that has started, and as a community, we will work together to look at the work that needs to be done. I've spoken, I was at the high school last night, spoken to a bunch of students and some teachers and heard really good things about the conversations that have already started, from a conversation and information garnering roundtable discussion. So far, what I've heard from some students has been very positive. We look for experts, organizations, advisors, consultants, and yes, students, parents, teachers, administrations, and this board to guide us in this work. What we need to keep in mind is that this is our work based on our community values around education and these difficult but important topics. While we may look for help from the outside, which we will discuss tonight, to jump to the conclusion that whoever we work with, individuals or organizations, that they get to insert, promote, educate, or change our values throughout the process in terms of what we want to accomplish for the district and the community is wrong. And that's not how this works. We are in control. People and organizations will help us with structure, scaffolding, process, and guide us toward a project, process, and program that fits our values, thoughts, and ideas around these topics as a district and as a community. We're here tonight to listen, learn, and ask the questions. We need to keep this important work moving forward, and we will do it together. So thank you. I will turn it over to Dr. Adley. I will move to public comment. Michelle, we'll start with our friends that are in the audience. Yeah, sure. Just from a public, no, please come up. Thank you. The speaker tonight, Ken, has a hard stop at 6. So we'll welcome public comment in person and Zoom, but I just like to keep that in mind, and then we'll have public comment at the end of the meeting also. So thank you. Please go ahead. Is that microphone on? Hold on, or we might have to have you speak louder. Good.
Good evening.
You can bend that down. That's good. Maybe that'll help. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Let's start. Good evening. Melissa Zablocki, Bellingham Road. Tonight, we will be receiving an introduction from consultant Ken Shelton, who's been engaged by the district to help fix our schools in Darien. My understanding is he will be working directly with our children, as well as helping to develop the plan that will guide the future of Darien Public School System. It is important for everyone to be aware of a few things before he presents to the wider Darien community, like what is his experience making him qualified for this role, and what is his overall platform or core values on the education system as a whole. I was alarmed to hear he's already met with some children and conducted an informal assessment with a small selected group before he was presented to the Darien community, parents, and taxpayers. Again, decisions were being made without transparency, and another example of a huge revision to our education system put in place by a small group of people in the administration and BOE. At the end of the day, Mr. Shelton's sole focus seems to be to dismantle one of the top school districts in the country. So I have a few questions in mind as I listen tonight. What is the exact nature of his presence and guidance in our schools, community, and especially with the strategic plan implementation? And why do we need to fundamentally transform a school system that is ranked #1 in many areas across the state and nation? Is this in the name of equity? Parents really need insight into this, as it could change the whole dynamic of Darien as a town and the reason for why so many people move here. One point to take away from Mr. Shelton's own writings and teaching is he believes in eliminating all grading systems within schools. And he states, I quote, "Grading is implicitly rooted in racism, anti-Blackness, sexism, transphobia, and ableism," end quote. This is a very radical view, and I'm not sure how academics suddenly became the rotten core for labeling stereotypes and racism. This paints all schools as inherently being racist. Some of the top performing students in this nation are from Nigerian, Indian, and Chinese descent. I urge you all to research his works, as he is an outside consultant engaged to interject his narrative into Darien. How does this help children understand each other better and process emotions to become more mindful, accepting humans? With no traditional grading system, how do we hold children accountable in school and life? There needs to be some benchmark and assessment across the board. This is the real world, the unfair world we need to learn to navigate, the corporate and working world where we all get meets expectations on our performance reviews and paid less as a female executive than a male. So again, why are we dismantling one of the top education systems with unproven radical methods? The introduction of Mr. Shelton is quite frightening and drastic. He brings to the table a fringe view that only represents an extremely small group in Darien. Thank you all for being transparent tonight, and thank you for allowing us time to see into Mr. Shelton's role in Darien. Be well.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Anyone else from the audience?
Good evening, John Dunn, 175 Raymond. Before the special meeting begins, all of us need to be aware of the controversial and divisive writings and beliefs of consultant Ken Shelton. Grading is capitalist, racist, and exploitive. That is the title of the 4-part essay Mr. Shelton published earlier this year. Let me repeat that. Grading is capitalist, racist, and exploitive. I would strongly encourage everyone to read it. Now, some might be asking themselves, after the sad and disappointing incidents at DHS in Middlesex, what does grading have to do with the very reason this consultant was found and hired by Superintendent Adley and Assistant Superintendent Tramberg? In response, let me quote Mr. Shelton's article. Quote, "Grading is implicitly rooted in racism, anti-Blackness, sexism, transphobia, and ableism, mental, intellectual, physical," end quote. He also says, in fact, any discussion about equity design, social and emotional learning, or any other program that does not include grading in the conversation is irresponsible and harmful to many students. Do Superintendent Adley and Assistant Superintendent Tramberg believe this as well? Are they supportive of drastic changes to Darien Public Schools grading system as part of their embrace of DEI and SEL agendas and training? And what about our elected board members? Where do you stand on this? At the October 26th board meeting, we heard from many parents who voiced their concerns about what was happening in nearby school districts in the name of equity. Gifted programs terminated, AP classes canceled, midterms and finals removed from the curriculum. Many of us asked, what's in store for our wonderful Darien schools? In response, Superintendent Adley and Assistant Superintendent Tramberg have now hired a vocal advocate of abolishing traditional grading in the classroom. Let's just add this to the ever-growing list of tone-deaf responses from this administration. How does any of this benefit our children? And how does the concept of eliminating grading help them get into the colleges of their choice or prepare for the real world? I should also point out that the week after that very meeting, Darien residents went to the polls, and from the first selectman to the Board of Ed and other down ballot positions, your constituents resoundingly made their voices heard. This isn't the path the town wants to take. As we hear from other concerned parents, we need to keep asking, does this administration, as well as our elected board, support these polarizing, controversial, and unproven views? If the answer is no, and I strongly believe it should be, we need to terminate our relationship with Mr. Shelton to find a more inclusive consultant that is reflective of Darien's values. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn. Anyone else from the audience? Sure, please come up.
Hi, I'm Krista Carnes. I don't have anything really written. I'm just going to respond. I wasn't sure. I was
Just
gonna do this.
your name and address.
Sure, Krista
Thank you.
Carnes, 40 Fitch Avenue. I just want to say that we haven't met Ken Shelton yet. So I think we all need to just listen to what he has to say. he might have written papers on grading, and if you work in education, I happen to work in a school, I'm not an educator, but assessment and making sure that our kids learn is what we need them to do. And sometimes grading systems don't always treat all the kids the same. Again, we need to give tools and techniques and pathways for success for all of our students, because they may not all want to get into the college of, your choice, but they want to get onto a path of success so they can find a fulfilling life. We have to listen to him. And one of the core tenets of diversity, equity, and inclusion is not jumping to conclusions before you have all the information. And I would argue that that's what some people are already doing without even listening. So I would hope I might comment later, but that's my thoughts on that. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Anyone else from the audience? Sure, please step up.
I'm Natasha Tomei. I live at 6 McLaren Road South. I have not had the time to listen to or read all of Mr. Shelton's papers or YouTube videos, but I've heard of some associations with groups that are pro CRT and do have pretty radical views on education and changing education. And therefore, I'd like to ask the board, my concern is that it's a slippery slope to re-engage. I know that we've already engaged Mr. Shelton in some work, but tonight I think we're making a decision on a very specific scope of work that I have here to have him continue on with the district. And it looks like it's just, 15 or something like that, on-site visits and remote visits as well. My concern is that once you really start something in progress, you may not stop it because you've already, and then you'd have to reinvent the wheel and begin anew. So I think that it's important to take a look, at any consultant that we hire, particularly the consultant that we're looking at tonight, and make sure that their values actually do align with the district values. I understand, Mr. Deneen, your comments that we're still going to be in the driver's seat, but there is a slippery slope here when you bring somebody in who is an expert to drive a particular initiative that, is in our strategic plan. I just don't want to get too far down the road with somebody who we later decide may not be best suited for the role. So, it's like doing a construction project. You bring somebody in and you get to a certain point, you're like, well, do I get rid of them and hire, start this all over again? Or is that going to be more, agita for me? So I just want us to really think about that before we spend another $50-something thousand, in this year's budget and then move on, because the strategic plan is 1, 3, 5 years and then into perpetuity. So we're not done here. We're just beginning to engage people. So the people that we engage really need to be the right people. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Mr. Chairman, we're down to 45 minutes.
Yep.
Mr. Shelton,
Anyone
can you
else in
remind
the
someone?
audience? How many hands do we have online, Michelle?
There, one hand.
All right, let's take that one real quickly.
Ms. Teresa Vogt,
And
you
then
are
we'll-
unmuted and recognized.
Then we'll move to Mr. Shelton.
Hi, Teresa Vogt, 22 Circle Road. I'm glad the district is finally doing something about diversity, equity, and inclusion, because we are preparing for them for the real world. I have a child in college. Every year she has to do a diversity, equity, and inclusion discussion. It's something that they're all required to listen to. It's like a 3-hour thing that they're all required to listen to. My husband was required to do DEI training for his job. This is the real world. We are preparing our children for the real world. Let's listen to what Mr. Shelton has to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Great, Dr. Adley, I will turn it over to you now.
Yes,
We have public comment at the end of the meeting also.
Thank you. Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. It's nice to see you here. Thank you for coming in person and online. And I'd like to welcome Ken Shelton. And if you could get Ken up, I'd appreciate that. Just a couple of things in terms of, it is correct to say that Ken has been here. Ken was here and did professional development for staff last year. And he was here working with professional development with staff this year, and also work with groups of kids at the middle school and high school. I will say in suggesting that we retain his services, that is one characteristic that I would point to, and that he was actually has been well received by a staff over 2 years, and the students groups he was also received well by those two student groups. It'd be quite easy not to be well received by those groups. And if that was the case, I don't think it would be bringing a recommendation forward. In looking at all our options, both to continue the work that we have in the strategic plan and also be responsive to some of the issues that we've been dealing with off and on, honestly, over a period of a couple of years. We looked at a number of organizations and a number of programs and resources. I'll list just a couple for you, just a quick background. The ADL, NCCJ, Challenge Day, Interaction Institute for Social Change in Boston, CREC and CES as our RESC organizations, programs from NYU, programs from UConn, and then dialogue with tri-state administrators. Ultimately, we interviewed a couple of organizations. That was ADL, NCCJ, and Institute for Social Change, and CAN. And while it wasn't set out intentionally, honestly, to select one person to do all of the activities, that is the way it sort of turned out through the interview. I say call it interview, but discussion with administrators and the various organizations. This is where we landed, and I'm pleased that we did land in this. I'll call it a solution, but this partnership, that continued partnership. So a couple of other reasons just before we get Ken gets introduced. One, yes, he is a consultant, and with such, he's not bringing a particular program to the table. The responses will be personalized to Darien and to what our staff and our community and our parents and our board wish to see. He's an educator first and foremost. That may not seem much, but it is to teachers. I can assure you that he spent years in middle school and also with our students, and that's also a big connection. He has worked with schools, organizations, and different corporations. He also can work closely with different constituents, students, staff members, parents, athletes, different groups. He has all those experiences. He does provide, or anybody under this scenario would provide, continuity and coherence of programming. So I think that that's one of the advantages of, certainly in this case, just the way it played out, of having one person to work with our different constituents. He does bring a diverse experience based on his own life experiences. So I think you'll hear that this evening, some of those things that will come out. And I think that Darien is a place that's complex sometimes, right? Has high standards, high expectations. I think he can meet all those and would work very well with all of our constituents. So with that, I see Ken right there. I will introduce Ken. Ken is calling in this evening. Actually, I think he's from Baltimore this evening. He's doing a keynote at, I believe, 6:30 sharp. With that, Ken, I want to thank you and welcome you to the board. And I'll turn over for you if you would like to say some introductory comment or two just to get us up and going. And then with the board's your permission, I will open it up for discussions or anything else about the plan that the board may wish to.
So, Mr. Chairman, a point of order. What are we doing tonight? And I sent this in an email a few days ago because this is warned as a discussion.
Correct.
Yes.
It's not an interview. I hear the community thinks that we're doing something tonight and there's no vote warned for tonight. So what is the goal for this meeting so that we know how to engage with Mr. Shelton? And I would have appreciated an answer prior. So I think the whole board could have kind of known what our goals and our work were for tonight.
So in order to move forward, obviously the board has to approve funding through the budget process for this year. So this was an opportunity to literally meet Ken, have a discussion with Ken, raise any issues that the board may want to address or have a greater sense of particular topics around it, so that when a proposal is made to come forward with a budget a modification or adjustment, you'd be in a position to make a judgment on that.
So this is an interview in public.
Essentially, yes.
Thank
I think a discussion and interview.
That's fine.
I won't say semantics, but it's.
Well, either is or it isn't, but go ahead.
Go ahead.
Ken, are you there?
Yes, can you confirm that you all can hear me?
We can, and
Yeah,
you're
perfect.
now on the screen. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you. So I guess I'd start off by saying that it's both a privilege and a pleasure to virtually meet all of you. So I appreciate the opportunity to spend time with both the board and members of the community. And I also want to thank the members of the community for sharing their thoughts that preceded my time being here on with all of you. So I'd love for us to be able to explore and examine what we're doing together, as well as any additional questions or even concerns that you all may have around the work. Prior to our discussion, I think it's important for me to share with the board and the community that my goal in all the work that I do is largely framed around my experiences as an educator. As Dr. Adley shared, I taught in the LA Unified School District for over 18 years. And I've had the privilege of working with 4 of the top 6 largest districts in the country, as well as a myriad of other districts that in some cases are very similar in size and demographic scope as Darien Public Schools. And so my primary focus is on which one of the community members brought it up, and I'm in full agreement, is to mold what my expertise and experiences are within the context of the culture of the community, the strategic plan, and the 7 goals that are outlined in the strategic plan as well. So basically, I know the concerns because I've heard them and I actually agree with them. It's not a situation where an outsider is coming in and telling you how to do it, because one of the meeting members mentioned the strategic plan 1, 3, and 5 years. If an outsider comes in and tells you how to do it and tells you what to do, then that's not sustainable. And the whole goal here is for sustainability, because it just has to be sustainable. That's how I measure success. Is it sustainable?
Thank you very much. I will open it up to board questions and Mrs. McCammon.
Hi, Mr. Shelton. My name is Jill McCammon. I'm best to speak clearly. I'd like to start where you just left off. I know you have a background in technology education and you've done a lot of work in education in general, and you talked about sustainability and, sort of succeeding. How are you going to measure success when you leave us in Darien? What does sustainability mean to you in terms of something that we can really get our hands around?
Yeah, and thank you for asking that question. Sustainability to me with all of you is all of the following, is that we've seen the growth in the certificated and classified staff. The educators at both the high school and the middle school have recognized areas of personal growth as well as what I would say organizational growth, to where they ensure that ultimately the easiest and most simplistic way I describe it is if you all were to conduct an exit interview of every single child that goes through the entire school system when they turn 18, the goal for me and the work that we would be doing together would be that they would simply say, I felt seen, I was heard, I was loved, and I realized my full potential right now. And that's really all it boils down to. I don't measure anything based on any specifically any numerical values or anything like that, because ultimately every child in their own family has their own goals. And the whole idea is that education has put you in a position to realize your full potential by the time you leave the district. So that would be one way to measure the sustainability, is how do we look at and examine the internal processes as well as the hearts and minds, and how do we mold an awareness as well as a sustainable actions behind that awareness that are not only aligned with the strategic plan, but also, again, distilling it down to those simple 3 areas: every child to be seen, heard, and loved.
Mr. Shelton, could you, I think it would help the conversation and the public that's participating. A bunch of 12th graders that I spoke to the other night, a couple of teachers, they were complimentary of the discussions that you've been having. Could you give a little background on those discussions, the topic, some of the learnings that you've gotten out of that, and how that fits into the overall process?
Yes, and thank you for asking that question. The discussions were around norm setting, as well as what I call from an asset and empathetic and attentive listening approach. So the whole idea around all of this work, and really even when you think in terms of conversations that are usually identified as uncomfortable or difficult, I tend to encouraged shifting those descriptors to necessary. Is the first step is what kind of a listener are you? Are you listening to learn and grow, or are you listening to respond? Number one. And then number two, the privilege I had of spending time with the staff at both the high school and middle school, as well as the students, was identifying what gifts you bring to the discussion. So even in the context of all of us right now, if we were to have gone through that process together, which by the way, I would certainly welcome the board's presence at any workshop I lead, is recognizing that all of us are unique individuals. We have unique experiences, we have unique perspectives, and having that uniqueness in the context of a conversation of which we all have identified a commonality around our purpose and our goals. That's how you start to look at what gifts you bring to the discussion. And that way you ensure, and that's kind of aligned with my stance on equity, is recognizing the gifts that every individual has and how that supports the collective growth. So essentially, if everybody has a voice, then how do we ensure that not only every voice is heard, but that voice is affirmed and is specifically identified as a value to the growth of the group as a collective?
Thank you, Mr. Shelton. Mrs. Achman.
Hi, Mr. Shelton. Thank you for joining us tonight. Can you talk a little bit about what districts you've done this work in or completed these kind of audits in, and then maybe how the end result or the end product was tailored to those communities, right? And I've watched a lot of your videos. So obviously LA school district might have different concerns or need than a Chicago school district that might have different concerns or needs. So can you talk about where you've done this, and maybe generally, as long as it's not compromising anyone's confidentiality, kind of how things were different based on the needs you saw or the needs the community brought forward?
Yes, and thank you for asking that question. I think ultimately my approach is always the following, and I like to use the identifier is operating in thought partnership. So one is the ability that I've had to review the strategic plan, as well as the meetings that I've had with Dr. Adley and with Mr. Transberg as well, around getting a deeper understanding of not only what you all have said as far as policy in the district, but also what is the culture at each of the school sites within each of the classrooms. And this is why I met with the staff at the middle school, high school, and then a select student group. So in terms of other comparable, I would say in size, demographic scope districts as yours, the first step is to get a deeper understanding of the culture of the district, no matter what. And just to your point, my work in LA Unified is very different because LA Unified is massive. Same thing with Chicago Public Schools and Broward County Public Schools. And so my approach is usually around all of the following. So if it's a smaller district like yours, I have more opportunities to have direct communications with, in some cases, cabinet, or in this case with the superintendent and assistant superintendent. And then even in terms of that, it's send me all the materials around, again, the strategic plan, any recent board meetings, any different policies that have been adopted, what are the different programs that are in place for the students, how are students enrolled in these programs, what are the breakdown demographics around gender, around class, around race, around any one of those things, how are they distributed across all of the curricular programs, what percentage, so if you're thinking in terms of high school, I even look at, especially in California, because that's easy data for me to access, what percentage of students graduate as what's called UC eligible, which means they, of the University of California system, they've completed all of their minimum level requirements to be eligible for that. So what does that look like? If a student graduates and they aren't in that position, what other options do they have? So it gives me a real comprehensive picture of what the culture of the district is and what the culture and the values of the community are as they're aligned with the district. And then I take that and then I mold that within things like the conversations I had the privilege of having earlier this month. So again, it's a way of saying, I'm not coming here to tell you, I have an experience and an expertise, and I want to learn more about what your culture and your values are, and how does that fit within what my expertise is, so that, going back to what I shared earlier, so that we as thought partners can ensure sustainability in work.
Okay, and I'm sorry, this is a weird forum to be interviewing and asking for references, but what school districts would we look at where this work has been completed?
It's quite a few. I mean, I could start off with several districts in Northern California, Union School District. Again, I'm trying to think.
I know there's limited time, so if you could provide that to the super, we could look at it. That's what I mean. It's a little awkward of a setting. So if we could just see it as just kind of examples of what the results of a DEI kind of work was, because this is a new venture for Darien. Thank you.
Yeah, not a problem at all.
Thank you, Mrs. Achman. Mr. Sini.
First, my name is Sean Sini, and thanks again for your time. And I do welcome the transparency that this venue is offering, because you did hear some concerns from the community. I had the opportunity to watch your Let's Talk Bias interview with Taya Raxon, I think, and it was an hour-long interview, and you gave some great perspectives of your life experiences and how you would address DEI in many cases. And one of the most important elements I took away from it was the importance of understanding others' perspective and creating these cross-cultural connections through this. So maybe taking Mrs. Achman's question, but also tilting it a bit to, you heard the concerns from a number of community members. I've definitely heard the concerns directly from community members over these last few days, based on some of the writings that you had. Even in that interview, you called capitalism a Ponzi scheme. You questioned class rank, and you called meritocracy a myth. And I don't mean to attack you with those, but give you the opportunity to kind of navigate through some of those thoughts, how it differs from the culture, I think, of this community, and how you would navigate that into a very productive relationship with this district.
Yes, perfect. And thank you for taking the time to watch that video. I think it's important to share with all of you that if you look at what I've written, and even as you share what I've shared in the video, that's all largely based on my lived experience as a Black male student and as a Black male educator. So I'll give you all an example. It's a story I share in one of my talks, the class rank. So I come from a family of educators. I actually happen to be the fourth generation of college, to graduate from college in my family, which is already a significant accomplishment if you think about the fact that I'm 51 years old. And so I remember in high school, for example, my AP English class, where I knew that I was fortunate enough to play athletics as well. So I knew I kind of had that, but my father had always essentially instilled a value in both myself and my younger brother that he demands excellence both on the athletic field as well as in the classroom. And so, for example, with my AP English teacher, I remember that she wanted us to collaborate with our classmates. And I just asked a simple question. If I collaborate with one of my classmates that's going to end up ranked higher than me, then wouldn't it be in my best interest to sabotage their work so it affects their grade, so I improve in rank? And my whole idea, even around sharing, and of course she said, no, it doesn't work that way. But my whole idea in sharing that story is, I believe that all learning environments should be cooperative, not competitive. There are, as a community member shared, there are plenty of things in life that are competitive. But even my approach with my students was, the whole idea was, if we're running a race together, our goal is so that everyone crosses the finish line, not who crosses the finish line first. Ultimately, as you get older, and I would say to my students, as you get older, you get closer to the time we finish high school, you're going to kind of figure out what your first next path is going to be. For some, it was college. For some, it was career and technical education. And for others, it was going and working in the family business. My whole thing was, what am I doing to ensure your wellness and your empowerment? And how are we doing it together? Because ultimately, even in the context of our dialogue here, which I've shared this with Dr. Adley numerous times, this is why I love the phrase thought partnership. Ultimately, we are able to accomplish far more if we work together in that process. And the whole point around the diversity and inclusion is you do have to have perspectives that aren't aligned with yours, because otherwise you have an echo chamber and all you're going to do is recycle doing the exact same thing. And this is this is part of what I shared in the video and what I even shared with the staff around. The first step is to actually listen and to be able to recognize that all of us have different lived experiences, and we don't, the last thing you want to do is discredit or dismiss a lived experience of another person. We want to get a better understanding of that, and then now identify what are the commonalities that we have in our experiences based on our common purpose or goal.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Best.
Hi, Mr. Shelton. My name is Julie Best. Thanks for being with us this evening. Sort
Thank
of
you.
following up on what you were talking about just then, would it be possible for you to share with us some of what you heard when you met with students from Darien recently? Or if that's to identifying on a broader sense, some of the kinds of things that you learn from students when you start this work?
Yes, I can share in general sense for sure. I got the sense, which happens pretty much all the time, the students want to be able to engage in the dialogue. They want to be able to be in a position to be supported in understanding the processing of the information that they're consuming, the information that they're learning. They want to be in a position to be able to get a better understanding of things that are going on both in their world and outside. The screen froze. Can you all hear me still?
Yes, we
Yeah.
can.
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. Okay. So basically, in the whole context with the students, and especially the high school students, what I was hearing from the students were all of the following things. We want to be able to talk more about social issues. We want to be able to get a better understanding of how that fits into the context of what we're learning. And then the big one with them was, we want to make sure that when we want to share what we're thinking, that the adults are actually listening.
Mrs. McCammon.
Mr. Shelton, in our strategic plan, we have a number of values, as you know. And one of the things I think we hear from the community is the concern that our focus on excellence and innovation could be compromised if we focus too much on trying to if there's a feeling that we could be trying to pull everybody back instead of lifting everyone up. And the concerns, I think, about grades speak directly to this. Can you please talk about how we as a community can maintain a culture of excellence? It's the reason a lot of people, academic excellence, it's the reason a lot of people choose to live here, because they believe in the schools. Can you please address that concern directly?
Yes, absolutely. Ultimately, my approach is a rising tide lifts all boats. And so I'm in full agreement. You don't pull things back, you uplift. And if you think in terms of a phrase that I like to use, and I've done a lot of research around, is targeted universalism. So I'll give you all a prime example of what that looked like when I was in the classroom. I had students that were performing at a very, very high level, and I had other students that were not. So I requested resources and supports for the students that needed that additional help to uplift where their performance was. But those resources and support were still available for the high performing students as well. So you see, the whole idea is to uplift the entire group, not to pull back any of the high performers. And I would contend that, first of all, excellence and innovation, and any one of the words that we use that we would identify, we want all of our children to be able to experience in their entire school years, if you will. That should be at the core of everything that we do. How are we ensuring that we, one, know how the resources are distributed for supports for all the students? How are we measuring those supports? And how is that operationalized within the context of the classroom or even within an entire school? So to basically, in a nutshell, to answer your question, I don't believe in pulling back from anybody. This is not a zero-sum game. You don't take from, you add to.
Mrs. Ackman.
So it seems to me, being involved in education for a long time now at this level, that we used to have this conversation around special education, right? And we've gotten to a point now where we understand that special education need different children who are in the special education program need different supports in order to be able to achieve. But DEI, and I imagine you've found this in other districts, seems to have a pushback. Can you explain why you think, or how you have helped communities get more comfortable with this idea that DEI is lifting everyone up and not pulling people back?
Yes, I'm glad you're asking that question. The first step is to be able to engage with the community in conversations, not unlike what we're doing now, although my preference would have been for us to be able to do this in person, and to be able to get a better understanding of even our own experiences working our way through different educational systems, whether you are in a public system or a parochial system. And so then when you understand the whole idea around, and look, I get it with parents who have children in the community and in the schools. You don't want something taken away from your child to be given to another child. And this is precisely why my approach is the rising tide lifts all boats. And so, for example, using what you just shared, even when I was in a classroom, I had students that had IEPs and that had special education services. They should not be denied access to the same core curriculum and learning experience that the high performing students were afforded. The whole idea was provide the resources. Now that resource is not only available for those students, but there might be the opportunity for another student to be able to engage in whether it's a human resource or any other type of resource, because ultimately, I think there's always room for growth, no matter how excellent you are. And to be honest with you all, one of the analogies I used to use with my students, because as I shared earlier, I did have the fortunate privilege of playing college football. As I said, even the best players, we still practice. There's still always room for growth. And what you want to do is make sure that you are providing the resources and supports to operationalize and fulfill that growth. So in the end, again, my approach is never to take away from one and give to another, or to isolate an individual group and say only this group gets the support. So the whole idea is that you support and uplift the community as a whole.
Mr. Brown.
Ken, thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Dave Brown, I'm one of the board members. Couple questions. In listening to the conversation here tonight, you mentioned that you want each student to be loved, seen, and heard as they go through as an individual. But later on, you were talking about doing some sort of inventorying. I think one of the group criteria you mentioned was class. I'm not sure what that is, but what's the purpose of inventorying individuals by group? How does that promote their individualness?
Oh, you mean targeted universalism?
I guess it was a context about coming in some of the audit work and some of the inventorying you would have to do and look at the district to figure out how to mold or sort of craft and customize the program moving forward.
Oh, yeah. So, okay. So now I understand. Yeah. I mean, ultimately that's me being mindful of and respectful of the culture and the values of Darien Public Schools, as well as the community at large, where I'm not, I don't believe in me going in and telling you what to do. That's not how I operate, and that's not sustainable. And quite frankly, that is very myopic in perspective. And so the whole idea is, again, taking what I know and the supports that I'm providing as thought partners with Dr. Adley, among others, and saying, okay, here's what you have. And I would actually even argue one of the conversations that we had is the fact that because I don't live in the community, I am coming in with a different perspective, a different lens, and I may see some things that that you all may not see, or I may see some things that you do see and just simply affirm what you're doing. The whole idea is what is our universal approach align with what you have outlined in the strategic plan, as well as those 7 core goals. And so when you do it in that capacity, again, no one voice takes on a higher value or importance than another. And it's just the whole idea is that in the end, by the time everything is all said and done, we are all a better version of ourselves, and our children are getting a better learning experience as a result of the time that we spent together and the work that we did together.
Thank you. Two other questions. I have not read the article that was mentioned earlier today. I wanted to hear from you first, but would you care to speak to grading, your thoughts on that for the community while we have you here?
Yeah, so sure. Now, keep in mind, my work is not specific to grading, but I would encourage you all to feel free to read it. Read part 1, which I frame I co-wrote it with a friend of mine. I frame my own experiences as a learner and as an educator within our current grading system, that I'll even share with you all one example. So when I taught, it took me probably until my 5th year to start to realize that, for example, that the 100-point scale is not equitable. If you really think about it, a 100-point scale, you really only have 11 percentage points of success, and that's 90 to 100. And so for me, the whole idea was, how are we assessing learning, and how are we supporting growth in learning? And is it truly focused on learning, or is it focused on a number? And so 2 of the things that I immediately changed with my grading policy were all the following. So every project that a student did or group did, it was the 3 R's, which was reflection, revision, and resubmission. Because again, the whole idea is growth and support. I also shifted to a 4-point scale, not a 100-point scale, so that way, if you'll notice that there's no zeros, there's a 1, but keep in mind, revision, reflection, revision, resubmission, because ultimately I wanted all students to be successful. And when you think in terms of the culture of the school, I'll never forget that probably about 3 or 4 years before I left the classroom, I was in LA Unified, so the numbers might shock you all. So my average class size was 45, and I worked at a school that had a 7-class period day. So you can do the math as how many students I had. 98% of my students for several years earned a letter mark of an A. And it was earned. It was not like grade inflation or giving. And so think about what that does to the mindset of a child, of which they've been supported and affirmed, and they've achieved something because they got the supports and they were given the opportunities to continue to work it and work it and work until they got better at it. The analogy I used to use with my students was when I played football, is you worked on a play, you worked on a play, you worked on a play, and you kept doing it over and over and over again. And even when you think you didn't make a mistake, the film will tell you where you made a mistake, and you do it until it becomes almost second nature. The whole idea around learning is, how do we continue to grow in that process so that you go over and over and over again? I got it. Now I move on to the next item. So that's part of the reason why I wrote that that series. And then, of course, I cite my own personal experiences with that, which I would just encourage the community members that that shared their thoughts around it, is to keep in mind that my framing of that is based on my lived experience. And I recognize that all of us are going to have different experiences. That just happens to be my experience around it. And I know for sure quite a few school districts are really starting to look at reforming their grading practices. The largest one in California is doing that is San Diego Unified. They shifted to a 4-point scale, and they are going to more of a mastery process of grading, which means you have to show a set of standards at a particular point, and then you can move on. It's similar to how you get promoted in the military.
Thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it, Ken. And then the last follow-up I had is, we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've also had some discussions here about equality. And I guess the question I would have, and this may not be fair because obviously you're going to come in and tell your work to the community, but perhaps broadly, generally, how do you define those different words? And are there distinctions between them, particularly equity and equality? That's a conversation we've had a few times here. I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so I as simplistic as possible, I look at equality as treating everybody the same. Equity is providing access and opportunity to each individual based on an individualized need.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kim. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. May I add one more thing? Just again, the way my brain works, just food for thought for the board and even the community member. In that series, and this is another thing just to think about with grading. In that series, I even give an example of something else that I shifted, and I'm sharing this with you all because I think it's important. One of the core perspectives that I maintain on a regular basis is humility. And I recognize that there's always room for growth. And when I'm introduced with new information, I always process it and look at it. Does this new information make me a better person as a result of that? So for example, I was not the same teacher in my first year as I was in my second, third, and so on and so forth. And I share that because one of the things I also mentioned in that grading piece was the fact that averaging is not fair. It's not equitable. And I even have an example of where it's the example is which student would you want to pack your parachute? Student A, over the course of 5 weeks, where they got 80, 80, 80, 80, 80, or student B, where they got 60, 60, 70, 100, 100. And if you were to average out those numbers, student B would actually have a lower average, even though in the last 2 weeks they scored 100, where student A showed no growth. And so the whole idea for that, and even putting that, was something that I learned in the classroom as well, was that even averaging isn't necessarily fair because it doesn't account for growth. Not everybody starts off at the same place at the same time, nor learns at the same pace. And this goes to the whole idea around equity: is how am I gauging individuals on an individual basis and tracking their growth? And then now what does that look like in a letter grade? And it required a lot more work on my part, but in the end, I know that I can look in the mirror at night and sleep well, knowing that I was supporting all of my students to realize their full potential. So again, I definitely welcome you all to read what I wrote, and I welcome any further dialogue around that if anybody would like to have it, for sure.
I appreciate it so much. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Mr. Sini.
Just one follow-up, Ken. In the proposal that Dr. Adley produced to us, there's 4 bullets or 4 paragraphs, and one is partner with the community. And given what you heard tonight and some of the I guess, concerns, I guess I would outline them as, talk about how you would interact with the community outside of the teachers, the administration, and of course our students, i.e. the parents and other members of the broader community.
So yes, and thank you. I think it's important, and I'm in full agreement with the community members. It's important for the community voice to be heard and not performatively heard, legitimately heard. And so many of the districts that I've worked with, when logistically, when it's been possible, we've actually formed a community partnership. And so we welcome members of the community to be a part of the process of the growth around the work that we're doing as well anyway. And several of the districts, the community partnerships serve as a type of advisory technical working group that from their perspectives, they were going to give additional feedback, ideas, and really, again, thought partnership around the operationalization of the strategic plan. So I think it's great to involve the community. Again, remember my experience as an educator was in LA Unified, which good luck getting the community involved with that when you're thinking in terms of the geographical scope of LA Unified. And this is where I think for you all as Darien Public Schools and many of the other school districts that are of comparable size, you have a unique gift that you can actually involve the community more intimately, not only in this type of work, but also ensuring that community voices are heard in the process as well. So I welcome the dialogue, and I actually would encourage some degree of participation, whatever that may look like, as a community partnership. And my final comment on that is that my favorite setup has always been the following. So the community partnership is usually a small group of the teachers, a small group of the students, and then now members of the community. And that's how you form that community partnership. That way you ensure that all of the critical voices are heard and that their voices are a part of that process.
Thank you.
Mrs. Ackman.
So following up on that, as a practical matter, you're in California most of the time, and I think the plan that we've seen lays out a lot of Zoom. We all love Zoom because we can do this, and we all hate Zoom because we're tired of it. So can you talk a little bit as a practical matter? This really is an ingrained community issue, I believe, and we only have control over the schools. But so how, from afar, do you get a real feel for what's going on from California in a small town in Connecticut?
Right. So during when we were on full lockdown, I worked with 2 districts where we did everything on Zoom. And again, part of that, to your point, part of that is that initial norm setting process, and even the vetting process for those that wanted to be in the community partnership. They just shared thoughts around what their experiences were, both as an educator, as a learner in the community, and what their professional roles are, and how, and of course, my approach, how does your experience as a professional and as a learner, what are gifts as a result of that? You bring the dialogue that we will have together align with our common goal and purpose, which is to see the strategic plan and the core values that have been set by the community and the district, see them to their successful fruition. So the beauty that we have is that I do have scheduled times to be there in person. I would certainly welcome, and I would actually think it would be great for us to be able to specifically plan a time when I'm physically there so that we can all sit down, break bread together, and engage in dialogue, and then perhaps use Zoom to bridge the times that I'm not there. But again, ultimately, even with that, the whole idea around that is to empower the community so that that you do live in California, that when I'm not there, the dialogue will continue and the growth will continue. I don't want you all to be essentially dependent upon me. I want to be a part of this process and be a part of a thought partnership with all of you.
Thank you.
Mr. Maroney.
Yes, hello, Mr. Shelton. Dennis Maroney here. So in your interview that I saw, you talked a lot about, or not a lot, but you spoke about privilege and what privilege has and what influence that has on discussions of DEI and bias training and so on. Can you, and I think not just me, but I think a lot of people around the country are still struggling with this idea of privilege and what it means and how do we deal with that? How do you teach that to 10, 11, 12-year-olds, 15, 16-year-olds to explain that and maybe especially in a community like here where we are very privileged to live in such a place?
Yes, so, and I'm glad you're bringing that up. Thank you. I mean, first of all, the whole idea around privilege is that my first thing is to recognize that all of us benefit from some type of privilege. So I'll give you all an example. At my last school, they were building a new wing to the school, and they had some members of the community as a part of this little focus group. And so then they revealed their designs in a faculty meeting. And so one of the privileges that I have is I'm able-bodied. And so me having that awareness, it doesn't make me a bad person, but having that awareness helps frame my perspective understanding of those that don't. So I'm sharing this example because when they showed the artist rendering of what they were going to build, my hand was the first hand that went up. And I said, I know that rendering is great and everything. I said, but what if I'm a wheelchair-bound student? How am I going to get in class? Because it all had stairs. It had no ramps. And so my whole idea around that is to recognize things that we may have that others don't and use it as an awareness piece to say, okay, how do I make sure that something I'm saying, something I'm doing is inclusive along those lines? So, I mean, even with when I was in a classroom, my class website, I had links to every page that was translated in every language that every child that I had that was spoken in the home. and then align with my perspective on even just education in general, I asked the students that was their first language. I said, can you read this and make sure that it's translated correctly and then it effectively communicates to your parents what we're going to be doing in class? So the whole idea around privilege is to recognize that we have things that others don't have and use that as an awareness piece, not necessarily, I don't believe in guilt and shame. I've seen that. And I know why that question comes up, where it's like, you should feel bad because you have something somebody else had. Look, there's things that some of us have that we've earned, and there's things that some of us have that are just by design. They're just, we got lucky. Like I shared, I was fortunate enough to play college football. So I was lucky enough to have athletic gifts to be able to do that. But that doesn't make me a bad person. What it makes me aware of is how do I ensure, as an educator, how do I ensure awareness around especially a child's experience that doesn't have the same physical gifts that I had, so that they can be fully inclusive and fully participatory in their learning experience.
I have to ask, what position did you play?
I played receiver. Then, so my head coach unfortunately passed away this past July. He had a battle with cancer twice. So I played receiver. Then I got switched to defensive back, and then I got switched back over to receiver. So just so you all know, I played at UCLA, and the head coach when I was there was Terry Donahue.
Mr. Devine.
Yes, Mrs.
So,
Ackman.
I've read your articles on grading and I've seen your videos. To tell you the truth, I think in some cases that they're not as radical as what people think. We don't do class rank here other than our valedictorian already. But what I guess the question would be, those may be your personal opinions. I think what the public is looking to hear, if you come to Darien and they have different opinions, can you put aside your personal opinions and work within the framework that Darien is telling you? So if Darien comes back and tells you, no, we love grading more than anything and we're going to grade, I think the public's concerned that there'd be a disconnect there. And I think what we need to hear from you is, are you able to say, you're right, that's my personal opinion, but I can work within the framework of what you value up until a point of whether you want to take my advice or not?
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. I mean, look, I have worked with districts where they don't want to shift their grading practices, especially the numerical part. And I always fought with the question, okay, then how might we work together to ensure that every learner is supported to realize their full potential? And that's why I shared the example of, again, my own experience. And I'm sure many of us, I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that many of us are within that comparable age demographic when we fill out the survey. Was the whole idea around, if you turn in a paper, you turned it in, too bad, too late, gotcha, this is your grade, move on. That I don't associate with learning. So even in the context of having whatever grading practices or policies you have in place, the whole idea here, and especially when it comes to equity, is what are we doing to ensure that every learner is engaged in the right degree of growth to realize their full potential? So no, my opinions are mine, and they're relevant to my experiences, but that's not necessarily, it would be irresponsible for me to do that, because then that ultimately, to your point, then that's still me going in and asserting what my perspective is on Darien Public Schools, which is not how I operate.
Thank you.
Mrs. McCammon.
Mr. Shelton, can you give some examples of inequities that you've uncovered in districts like Darien and how you've recommended people address them?
Yes. So off the top of my head, some of them are around things like how students are enrolled in rigorous academic programs. Like, what are the policies and practices around that? What resources and supports are provided to students that have IEPs and are receiving special education services? Are those students encouraged to take a more rigorous academic program, even if it's just one class? Most of what I've seen with districts that are comparable in size, but not necessarily the same demographic, are things like the punitive programs in place, the discipline programs around. I'm a big believer in restorative practices. I think that a lot of students, the whole idea is, are we addressing a symptom or are we addressing a disease? And ultimately, the whole idea is to recognize that many students, especially teenagers, they if they lack the vernacular to communicate what they're thinking, how they're feeling, it's going to manifest itself in some of their actions. And so how do we address the supports and resources necessary to mitigate those actions as a result of them not being able to do that? I think ultimately the whole idea around all of this is really to just get a better understanding of the lived experiences of the learners and how do we be responsive to those to ensure that the resources and supports are in place. I'm trying to think of a couple of other examples I could share with you all. Those are the main ones. I can even share with you, I know several of the high school students in the group, they expressed concerns around the fact that they did not feel that their voice mattered in some of their classes. And then I would ask them, well, tell me more about why you feel that way. And it was something, honestly, for you all, it was something even as simple as the teacher only wants us to raise our hand to be able to contribute to class dialogue. And I share with the students that, that's why I love technology, because that's how you can ensure that every voice can be heard. That's not just strictly from who raises their hand in class.
Thank you.
We're kind of at time, Mr. Shelton. Any kind of closing remarks you'd like to make, hearing our questions, spending some time in our community, spending some time with our students? You've looked at our strategic plan, but would love to hear your kind of closing remarks on all that.
Yeah, I want to thank you all. I thank the board and thank the community members for welcoming me into your space and for sharing your thoughts. I welcome any additional dialogue that we may be in a position to have, hopefully in person. And I would just say that, ultimately, again, just to reiterate that my approach to the work is to align what I know with the needs of the community, the values of the community, and the values that are set forth in the strategic plan, and to support and uplift the community as a whole and support the learners with my core basis. Again, that's how I was in the classrooms, how I am now. Core basis is simply to support everybody so that they are a better version of themselves, and me included, as a result of our interactions together. And so that every child at the end of the day can say, you know what, in my schooling experience, I felt seen, I felt heard, and I know I was loved. And that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Shelton. Thank you for your time and for working with us this evening.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Ken, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you. Good luck tonight.
Thank you.
Any comments, Dr. Adley, before we move back to public comment?
No, other than to say that I'm pleased to present Ken here today. It's time that we have to start the work. We have to start it somewhere. That's not just picking somebody out of thin air that we've done. I would hope that you would hope us that we would do our homework in the sense of research and follow up and having feedback from our staff, from our kids, that's someone who they would like to work with. I think it would work well with all of our constituents. So we're ready to do the work and to start the difficult work. So it's time to do it. And it's either with Mr. Shelton or we're going to do it with someone else, because I don't think the board is walking away from this charge that our kids are waiting for us, right? Our community is waiting for us. We've identified this is time to do it. So I'm very pleased to hear comments or thoughts about Mr. Shelton, but one way or the other, we're going to do it. So,
Mr. Senior.
So if I could, I didn't want to waste his time, but in the proposal you outlined, there are 13 on-site visits as defined and 13 remote visits. Is it 13 distinct visits as you understand it, or are some of these doubled up, like half the day is going to spend with the community, half the day with student leadership?
Yeah, while he's here, he'll double up on some occasions.
Okay.
Well, actually, Chris, do you want to talk about it?
No, it'll be 13 days that he's here live. So it might not be on separate visits. So they could be consecutive days should we be able to move forward with them.
Okay. And then, Mr. Chairman, maybe you can, we discussed a little at today's finance subcommittee meeting on how the funding mechanism might occur. You or Dr. Adley would want to address that.
So during the October statement of accounts, it was noted that this would be a deficit, run as a deficit at this point, either for Mr. Shelton or some version. We're going to need to address it in some capacity. If if the board is so inclined to move forward, we would be bringing forward a recommendation for a transfer in November.
And then just finally, just as a matter of procedure, I mean, this seems to be a superintendent cabinet hire, if you will, administrative hire, not a board hire. So this was great for transparency, understanding, your candidate, but the ultimate decision is going to lie with the administration, as I understand it, who you're going to work with, correct?
Well, ultimately, I'm sorry.
No, sorry, I thought you were done.
Answer
Go
that
ahead.
question and then we'll move to
Yeah.
Mrs. Ackman.
So ultimately, the mechanism of hiring someone is a financial process, board approved. But look, it would be silly of me representing the administration to bring in somebody who's not going to work well. This is too important to work. Mr. Shelton himself wants to be very inclusive of the board, parents, all the constituents himself. I want whoever we're working with or whatever groups we're working with to be inclusive too and transparent. What's the point if we're not? That's the nature of this particular work, that it is inclusive. So minimally, tacitly, I'm not going to bring anybody in here that I don't think the board's going to it's going to resonate with, because what is the point in that realistically? I mean, I'll leave it like that.
Mrs. Ackman.
So this is a new position outside of the budget. So the board hires, the board appropriates money and the board hires. It's not an administrative decision. And it would be a vote of the Board of Education. Secondly, when you say you would bring a transfer within the budget, or are we looking for monies outside the budget to pay for this?
Currently, I would be looking for money inside the budget currently.
What does currently mean?
Well, if there was other options available for funding for these types of things, I would certainly pursue them if I had that opportunity, or pursue them after the event if I could do that. But that's probably not going to be, probably couldn't do that part of it.
So I think at this point in time, you're looking to fund this within the existing budget.
Yeah, I'm looking for the urgency to start the work, yes.
Okay, and then in the October meeting, I had requested, and I know Mrs. Stein had requested when she was still on the board, to be able to see multiple candidates. Is there any intention to bring forward another candidate, or it's, if you don't take Mr. Shelton, we're back to square one?
I would say that this is our best recommendation based on the people that we have spoken to and followed up with and discussed this. So if it's not Mr. Shelton, I'll be back to square one in some capacity of rethinking the approach.
No, so I will just say, speaking as a board member, why I appreciate an hour with Mr. Shelton. It's hard just because this is new work and I don't have anyone to compare it to, or to ask contrasting questions to, or the same comparable questions and field a different answer. So I will just say, as an individual board member, that's proving difficult for me.
So I'm not going to bring anybody in front of the board that I don't think that they're going to work with. And right now, the people that we have discussed, followed up with, interviewed ourselves, I don't see anybody there who's going to do the work the way that we want to do the work or need to do the work here.
So I struggle, I mean, look, I'm being honest, and it's, again, I appreciate the transparency of the forum, but I'm trying to be direct. I find it hard to believe that there's no other DEI consultant worth interviewing, and that it has nothing to do with whether the professionalism or my feeling on this particular candidate, but usually on high-level positions or on important work in the district, it feels hard that there's only one person, or else, you know, the deck of cards falls. If that is where we are, that helps kind of form our decisions, I think, as board members, but that's why I requested in October, is there anyone else to consider? And if the answer is no, there's absolutely nobody else who can do this work, well, that helps make a decision, because I am committed to the DEI work.
So I think in answering your question directly, Ms. Ackman, I think we'll be back to the people that we have. I wouldn't exclude the people that we have, like some of the groups and organizations in of themselves may be able to come in and do a nice job in some capacity, like for instance, the ADL coming in and working with the kids in the middle school this particular week was very successful. But ultimately, I wouldn't be bringing it. I would be going back to, yes, there are DEI consultants out there. You are correct in that. Then I would be going back to square one to looking at other DEI consultants I wouldn't be bringing anybody that we've seen because I don't think they're going to, I'm not going to bring you somebody that I don't think has a vision for the work or is going to be able to work with the constituents. So I would be going back to relatively square one to looking at consultants who can do the work.
So I guess if you were, so to that point, what you're presenting to the board is that the work has been done, the interviews have been done, the meetings have been done, and this is what you're bringing to the board. So to go back to square one, you really would be challenged to bring someone back to the board that you feel has the qualifications to work with us on this work as a district. When you've come to the conclusion as an administration that this is the person that can help guide us with the work that needs to be done at the district level.
Both of those statements are correct, yes.
Okay. All right. Mrs. McCammon.
So you touched on it in the beginning, Alan, but talked about coherence, but can you take a few more minutes to develop why you specifically would like to keep Ken Shelton as your consultant? Why is it? Again, you touched on the highlights, but can you review those, please?
It sort of came out through the process a little bit, evolved through the process a little bit. This is, I don't want to be continually in this mode of reacting to things and public relations things regarding this, and actually, the actual incidents themselves continue, and these are just not acceptable. And so I'd like to be able to do it in a coherent a manner and coordinated manner, and someone who's going to have some continuity with us, know the district, not just come in, do a program, walk away, and work with our different constituents. So I think that it came out that we felt that there was value in that. Again, I wouldn't just mutually exclusively say that these other experiences can't do anything. No, I would not say that, right? Because on any given time we may engage in a different type of experience for a particular situation or otherwise. But it just came out that this was going to provide better coherence and continuity and consistency and honestly, transparency.
Mr. Chairman, my apologies. I have to go.
Okay,
to
thank you,
leave
Mrs.
for this
Ockman.
Meeting, I have a kids' school event.
Appreciate it. Thank you for the question, Mrs. Ockman. So Dr. Adley, to that point of working with Mr. Shelton, does it exclude, as we go through the process in working, if we were to work with Mr. Shelton and we go through the process and we look at some of the incidents that happened, it doesn't exclude that we may bring in the ADL or the NCCJ or other organizations to supplement or help with what we're finding as we go through the process. And they may help us in programming or education or additional conversations.
No, I think it'd be a wee bit short-sighted just to think that there's no other person, program, experience, activity that might supplement, complement anything that's taken place. And I wouldn't want any of the ones that I have listed to say, well, you listed them before and you didn't hire them as we didn't hire that. Well, yes, but this is a different purpose.
But there may be opportunities as we go through this process to work with those organizations. This is not all exclusive to Mr. Shelton.
Correct.
As we go through the process. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Deneen. I had two follow-up questions to Ms. Ockman's question. The first, Richard, not to put you on the spot, you can come back. Are there other grant opportunities or possibilities or other things to fund this type of work? And if you don't know, okay, but obviously we'd apply if there were, of course. And then the other question, Mr. Chair and Mr. Adley, is maybe I should have done my homework better, but knowing we didn't have action on the calendar tonight, I didn't. There was a comment that this is a board hire versus an admin hire. Could we get some clarification as to where this is, where the authority is, what the actual, what the actual parliamentary procedure is going to be on this, and any clarification around that as we move forward?
I can certainly get clarification. There are times where we do work that is in the budget. At least that's the way I see it. Richard, if you want to get clarification, that the board many times has updates to, and rightly so, many of the resources that we use. Actually, we include people. We would actually introduce them to you. Some of you participate in those workshops. I would encourage people to participate in these things, these experiences. So many of them are familiar names to us, but there are other ones experiences that we may use along the way that they're not as familiar perhaps, and that's incorporated into the budget. This one is just of the nature that it's significant enough that I think we need to have the discussion about it. I see it as being approved through the budget process, and I'll be happy to get clarification on that.
So I guess.
So I appreciate the quick answer. I would just ask if you want to, brief us ahead of the next meeting on
Sure.
that formally. I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I think your question's important, Mr. Brown, and we've had some dialogue around this where the board hired Dr. Lemon around the strategic plan because it was a board initiative. Exactly. I think like Ms. Friend, who joins us on a regular basis, in helping us. Mr. Shelton has been on board previously, so I look at it as the continuity of what you want to do from an administrative standpoint with overview to the board and approval through the budget process. But I think we'll get clarity to your question. It's a good question. Mrs. McCammon.
Related to that, my perusal of the policy catalog shows that we have policies that are clearly indicate what we would do for certified or non-certified staff, but are not very clear unless, Marge, you tell me I'm wrong, but I didn't see anything about this type of situation. So we don't appear to have a clear policy, which means we probably just have to decide what precedent we use. Again, we have Dr. Lemon, as you just said, Duke, we have Dr. Lemons who was working directly for us, but in the aggregate, we have not often voted for consultants.
Correct. And I think what we would do, and I think part of this process, what we're doing this evening, is to give the administration a consensus of where the board is and allowing the board to move forward with the work that we know has to be done. Okay. Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, in your opening remarks, you referenced that, this is still our school district and it will continue to be our school district. And I think what I'm hearing from the community is that there's this fear, if that's too strong of a word, but there's a concern that this is inviting a Trojan horse into the school system and we're going to go away from grading and do away with what all makes us an excellent school district. And I think we need to discuss those fears or concerns from the community and to show and tell parents how they can address them if they begin to feel like this is happening.
I appreciate that, Mr. Maroney. I think Mr. Shelton and Dr. Adley did some of that this evening. There's more work to be done around that. There's more work to be done in terms of listening to the community members. I think Mr. Shelton did a good job of talking about how we bring the community members and the parents into the discussion. And I think that's an important follow-up conversation. All right, shall we move to public comment, Michelle?
Do you want to start with any person?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
All right, thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
Julie Punishel, 23 Fitch Avenue. I waited to do my public comment until after I had my chance to hear Mr. Shelton speak. And what I want to speak to you guys tonight about is that you are here to serve our students. I want to repeat that again. You're here to serve our students. The community, the parents community have been very loud, and I understand that, but I really think the voices you need to listen to are the students. We've had 6 very brave students come up and speak, 1 alumna, and I think it's really important you listen to their voices. I think to the discussion about Dr. Adley has taken the time to listen to the students. I know he has had many, many interviews, many meetings, and he has spoken to them. They are begging you for change. Have you listened to what they spoke about, what is actually happening in the schools? It is an unsafe environment for them right now. I have 2 very high-performing learners. I have a daughter who is at Claremont McKenna College. It's a 9% acceptance rate. And when she got there, she was very happy to be in an environment that is a collaborative learning environment. That is something I think we need to look at. Our education system is an extremely high pressure cooker. I think if you listened to the parents, you would understand and you would hear many of our students are receiving mental health experts and help and advice and support because of the pressure cooker our students are in. I really think you need to listen to this. We need to act now. They are begging for it now. We do not need to delay. I feel a lot of what people are talking about with their objections is a tactic to get us to put the brakes on DEI. And I think it is really important we act now. And I think if you were to also listen and do the exit interview he talked about, if we were to actually do that with our students, I think you would be really surprised to hear what the seniors and the recent alumni have to say about their experience at Darien High School. A lot are not happy. They do not feel like it was a pleasant experience. They felt like it was a pressure cooker where it was very competitive, where everybody really strove for those grades. And it's a difficult place. And I think us listening to the students doing this DEI work will be very important to create a much safer, better learning environment where everyone feels seen, heard, and included, and feels like they're getting the best education they can. So thank you.
Thank you, Julie, for your comments. Anyone else in the public? Thank you.
I'm still Krista Carnes from 45th Avenue. I just wanted to say thank you all for your thoughtful questions to Mr. Shelton. I think it sounds like a great first step. And I think what we're talking about here is a systemic change for a long-held problem. Like Darien has a reputational problem with colleges. We are seen as exclusive, and exclusive does not mean opposite of inclusive. We have privilege here. We have opportunities that we can give our kids that many, many people in this country can't. And I'm not going to apologize for that, and nobody should. But I think we need to realize that A, not everybody has that, and B, the excellence that we tout needs to be representative of what the future is what the future is. And the future is our kids are going to be sitting across from people and asked to work collaboratively in college, in their careers. And if they don't have the perspectives that they need, even if they don't agree with them, if they aren't taught what they need, how they need to envision other people's positions, they will never be the leaders that we want them to be. They will just think that they can call their teacher and get their grade fixed. So all this grade stuff is kind of interesting to me because I know we all want our kids to do the best, but teachers are telling me that people are calling and making the difference between a 93 and a 94 is not the real world. Are you learning? Are you collaborating? Are you making a difference? And I think that's the core of DEI. I think you guys have a triage decision to make. I think this expenditure is for excellence, both in the immediate sense to create safety and confidence that people will be heard when they bring up their traumas. And this is a trauma-informed thing. I think that's something else that may come up. This is going to be a curriculum thing. Because what are we listening to? My heart was broken open in 10th grade in Darien High School when I was shown a documentary about the AIDS Club. And if you remember back then, this was like 1989. It totally blew my mind and changed who I was at my core. I'm sure everybody in that classroom didn't have it, but my teacher put it out there for me. And that allowed me to see the world a little bit differently because it certainly wasn't happening in my school. So think about what we need to know because we cannot put a pin in history. We cannot put a pin in science. We cannot decide that, civil rights research ended with Martin Luther King. Like, it's all moving forward and we really need to move forward with it. So as you make this expenditure for an immediate purposes, as well as the long-term, my kids in elementary school need to start to think these ways earlier, be presented with opportunities to do so. And so do our parents. Like, it's scary, it's uncomfortable. But if we are taught how to have those conversations, we're gonna make more of a difference in everyone's life. And we'll be the leaders that we want our Darien kids to be. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else in our audience?
Dr. Adler, you mentioned that the budget was already allocated for this particular expenditure, but it seemed like the door was open a little bit for future stuff. So, perhaps maybe address that later if there was, foreseeable additional budget items for consultants or something like that. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that some of the answers I thought were a little bit vague. It was vague on him picking, the grouping, the surveying, that type of thing. Looking at kids, and how to kind of get the equity on how that data would be collected and how, there would be more equitable outcomes. So those were questions that, his answers, I didn't feel a lot of clarity around. Thanks.
Thank you. Michelle, we'll move to our friends on Zoom.
Good evening. If you would like to speak during public comment, please click the participants icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Next, click the raise hand option. The facilitator will identify you. Please state your name and address. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment. Gregory Gramley, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi, Greg Rambling from 11 Blueberry Lane. Can you hear me
We
okay?
can hear you. Go ahead, Greg. We can
Okay,
hear you.
great. So just a couple comments. After listening to the presentation from Mr. Shelton today and having read some of his work and listened to some of the questions from the board, I think at this time, for me at least, I would not be supportive of increasing his involvement in the school system. The process seems rushed and the administration appears to be presenting a take it or leave it approach to what seems like a pretty important decision for the school system. Contrary to a couple of comments that were made, I do think that Mr. Shelton's views do come across as fairly radical. And a lot of it seems largely consistent with CRT or critical race theory, which I think our community has been pretty clear has no place in our schools. And I don't see how he can separate his extreme personal views from the job for which he's a candidate for. In addition, it doesn't seem possible, at least to me, that he will be able to understand our school and community culture via Zoom and a handful or two of in-person sessions. So I think, look, let's do right by our #1 ranked school system in the state and take our time and do this right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Grambling.
Susie, you are unmuted and recognized. You're still muted.
You're still muted, Susie.
How about now?
That's great. Please go
Okay.
ahead. Thank you. Your name
I'm
and address.
Susie Flaherty, 6 Lake Drive. I just want to echo the sentiments that the kids need this. And I understand that it would have been ideal to be presented with another candidate or two, but the kids need this now. And one of the things that we consistently hear from the kids is that they don't feel like they have a voice. And they have been sharing their voice with you, and they have been saying that they need this. So to deny them that now would send them yet another message that they can talk all they want, and we're still going to do what we think we should do. Secondly, I think we really need to be careful about the words that we're using. I don't think we need to worry about grading. I personally, and here's a perfect example of me being able to separate my personal views from the group. I personally think his grading system sounds fantastic, but I understand that that's a threatening thing for a lot of people in town. So I'm not worried about that. I don't think he is going to be pushing that because it doesn't work for our community. So I really think we have to be careful about the words we use and the words that we see being put forward tomorrow in social media. Are we going to hear a lot of scary words about, radical and racist and grading? I really think we need to hear the man as he is and what he said. But again, I want to reiterate, the kids need us to act for them now. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie.
Satori, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi, this is Clara Sartori. Can you hear me?
Yes, Clara, thank you. We
good.
can hear you.
I live at 161 Old Kings Highway South. I'm very glad you're doing this, but in watching the presentation tonight, I wanted to suggest a little more of a partnership between Mr. Shelton and someone from the administration. I think that there are a lot of places where he was a little vague, as the lady, previous speakers mentioned. And I just think it's important to have a person from Darien, from the administration, go along with him in what he, in his interactions at the high school or at the other schools. I was a little concerned about the comments relating to grading, simply because I kind of wondered, what does that do to the college process? What do colleges think if grading systems are very different? Maybe they're changing everywhere. I don't know that. I thought that most of his comments were reasonable, but I do think that on an ongoing basis, I hope you're not going to just hire him and then say, come back and see us again, when you have your report. I hope it's kind of an ongoing process. Thanks very much. Good night.
Thank you, Clara. Anyone else, Michelle?
There are no more raised hands at this time.
Thank you. Any further comments, Dr. Adams?
No, well, I always say, I should change that because most times I say no, but.
No, but.
I'll say this since you asked me, Mr. Chair. We're not going to dismantle the school system. we're not doing away with all these programs. And look, any school system can tell you that I'll say this just honestly, like the grading system for school systems are like the holy grail. We're not going to, like, that's not the entry point for this. Our kids are hurting, right? Our staff need training around all these issues. We have a lot of work to do before we even get, even if we did want to or think we needed to get to. Look, you could say, honestly, you could say there's no research for elementary school to be good, like primary school kids, kindergarten kids, and so on, doing homework. And yet you've got a homework. Like, there's no research for that at all. But that's not the entry point for this. That's not, I'd be shocked if we talking about that. But I also wouldn't say we include like any topics being like talked about, reflected on, or otherwise. But we've got so much work to do in this arena we're not dismantling programs. Like honestly, a lot of this is inflammatory in my opinion. Okay, and I'm certainly I'll also be respectful to members who have different opinions. We want to be inclusive with everybody. I think there is common ground on many of the things that we need to do, and let's work on the common ground or issues that we need to do.
I appreciate you saying that, because it's amazing how something that's written or read is then taken and the conversation starts about changing the grading system. That conversation has never occurred at this board table. All right, throughout the whole course of this. The same with other districts eliminating AP courses and different things like that. Those conversations are not at this board table. So I think that's where we have to be careful with what we pick up and what we insinuate or throw out in the course of the conversation and what the conversation actually is. So I appreciate you saying that. All right, may I have a motion to adjourn? Julie Best, second by Mr. Sini. All those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you all. Thank you all in the audience, and thank you on Zoom.